Azula in the newest graphic novel, Azula in the Spirit Temple, embarks on a journey of the spirit. Journeys of this kind are emblematic of transformation. They are where abstractions, grandiose and hollow conceptions of the self, are ultimately overturned by introspection, by the need to confront the genuine uncertainties and anxieties underlying these apparently falsely solid and fixed conceptions of the self. Someone like Joseph Campbell reduced this psychological journey that is in a lot of the old stories to a formula that he made famous as the hero's journey. And to his credit, Campbell introduced these concepts to a wide audience, and even random, uncultured teenagers nowadays know what the hero's journey is. But the problem with such a formulation is that it's oversimplistic. This is partly the fault of Campbell, but it is more the fault of everyone who has very much simplified and ignored a lot of his arguments that derive from a lot of Eastern philosophy, a lot of Buddhism and Hinduism, and a lot of Jung, who was also greatly inspired by non-Western religions. Jung refers to this as the Nighty Journey, which I like better. It is not just for heroes, it is for everyone, and it is inevitably happening in everyone's life. It is a fundamental part of the psychological processes we are all undergoing as we struggle to negotiate the relationships between ourselves, who we really think of ourselves as, and the world outside us. We, for Jung, need to form an idea of ourselves outside of the conditions in which we are raised. We need to develop our own specific individual self-consciousness, but it needs to be organically formed. It cannot simply be either a reiteration of our environment, the ideas that we absorb simply from a specific culture or a specific set of mores, but it can also not simply be a rebellion against that original culture, that original set of mores we're from, otherwise it remains too limited and too resentful. The Nighty Journey for Jung is, at its core, about going inside the self and realizing that the divisions we make between self and other are fundamentally flawed and fallacious. Our senses of self are too often built upon these damaging divisions between ourselves and the world outside us, between what we consider ourselves and what we consider not ourselves. But ultimately, for Jung, these are innately related. We need to recognize, if we are to form a full individual conception of ourselves that is healthy and beneficial to both ourselves and others, that we are inevitably interlinked with others, that we have this yearning for this sense of unity, for this source of complete immersion within the world outside of ourselves. So think about this in terms of Azula. Azula fundamentally has a basic idea of herself that she got from a very young age, and that has been amplified by her surroundings. The idea that she is special, that she is the favored child of Ozai, that she is one day going to take over Ozai's position and become the Fire Lord, that her aggression, her brilliant, cunning wit, her skill for manipulating others and revealing their secrets, that these are ultimately positive qualities that should be encouraged. They are signs of a majestic and strong leader who is not going to yield to the foolish pieties of a rather thoughtless and enervated world. These moral standards against aggression, against violence, against domination are for Azula ultimately set up by those who are just too weak and too dumb and too foolish to really counter strength, power, domination. So they take those qualities they despise and turn their dislike of them into a moral stance. It's a Nietzschean perspective, albeit quite a reductive one, that does not do justice to the complexities of Nietzsche's thought. In other words, it's not a good position to be in. It's a rather narrow and limited worldview. It's one based on the idea that everything is about power, that love, tenderness, sentiment, unity, a genuine sense of compassionate idealism, and desire for a better world order. All these things are irrelevant and sentimental, and nothing matters except using your cunning intellect and your forceful skills, both as an individual firebender and as a representative of a modern industrial power, to crush your enemies and take power for yourself. But ultimately, Azula is a bit of a sentimentalist too. She doesn't want to admit it, but she genuinely believes that people will not leave her if she relies on power, that its control over others is peerless, that it is inevitable, that despite what others might say, they ultimately will yield to the exercise of power. But this is not the case. She learns this. Her best friends in the world, people that she, despite how she treats them, she genuinely cares about, they abandon her because they don't think what she's doing is right or fair or just. They may not have the most complete and developed moral compasses, but they have behavior that they will not countenance, that is to them too cruel and too rapacious to be accepted. And so they leave her. Mei leaves her for Zuko, and Ty Lee leaves her in order to protect Mei. Azula is left desperate, and she realizes, because she is quite smart, even if she is so committed to her ideology that she does not want to recognize its flaws, she understands to a certain extent that the value system to which she has committed to herself is fundamentally corrupt. She understands her mother was right to a certain extent, and she cannot really comprehend that, so she kind of goes insane. She cannot reconcile what she believes she is with her actual experiences of the world. And this is where Jung comes back in. Jung fully admits that the confrontation with the not-self, with the shadow, with the who we believe ourselves not to be, is devastating. It can completely obliterate the self. It destroys the ego. And this is not necessarily a good thing. But it's ultimately a necessary thing. Otherwise, we are caught in the process of just repeating convictions that we already hold without any introspection, without any real ability to comprehend the ways in which our convictions do not fit our experiences in the world. We divide ourselves off from others. We divide ourselves off from that primordial unity that underlies all things and all people and all life forms, because we're so committed to this narrow set of beliefs about who we are and what we want. So ultimately, we need to reverse. We need to go within ourselves, and by going within ourselves, go back into what Jung, in his grandiosity, calls the realm of the mothers. Of course, very relevant for Azula, since she has a very fraught relationship with her own mother. But for Jung, this means going back to the source, to the unconscious world, to this basic wellspring of life and creation that exists within all of us, and that ultimately links us all together, but that we are not necessarily aware of. It is manifested through our connections to the figure of the mother. This does not have to be a literal mother, though it often can be, but this figure of life, this figure of creation, this figure that represents where we come from. Ultimately, we can go too far in our introspections and completely destroy our basic concepts of ourselves, because we're caught between two desires. The desire to exert ourselves as distinct individuals, and the desire to return to this unifying primordial wellspring of life, of creation and vitality. Ultimately, what we need to do for Jung is to go inside ourselves and go into this unconscious world, into this primordial world, and understand that our conceptions of ourselves were a bit too limited, that we are inevitably connected to the world outside of ourselves, and that this connection remains despite how the external details of everyday life distract us from it. If we can survive that confrontation, then we emerge as a stronger person. But it is difficult. This is the Nighty Journey. It is the journey from the daytime world, from the world of the land. The land and the daytime are symbols for Jung of certainty and security and order, into the world of the night and the ocean, which Jung very much associates with the unconscious, the world of the mothers, this world of creation, of unity, of everything being mixed together. If we emerge from that, we can shed our narrow ideas of ourselves and become stronger and more thoughtful and more mature people who understand our links to what we too often consider the world outside of ourselves, outside of who we believe ourselves to be. Azula goes through the first stage of such a journey, The book does not necessarily entail a journey of redemption, it's not that straightforward. But it does bring Azula to this point of recognition that is necessary for all concepts of transformation to truly take root within the psyche and evoke any potentiality of change and transformation in the future. There is a brilliant scene in the book that is just Azula having this dream where she's surrounded by her family, living and dead. Her mother looks just as Azula remembered her. Zuko looks just as he was when he was younger, and as such is here apparently Azula's younger brother. Azulon and Sozin appear, even though Azula never knew Sozin and only knew Azulon as a very old man. And she is supported. She wants that kind of support. She yearns for it, even though she does not want to admit that. Admitting that would fundamentally mean that her entire worldview, the entire system of belief to which she has committed herself, is fundamentally fallacious. Yet she takes important and necessary steps toward such a recognition, toward such an abandoning of the narrow and constrained boundaries of her ego. She is able to shed a lot of her old convictions and realize the extent to which she really wants a sense of community, a sense of being brought back with Zuko and with a lot of the people she cares about. She recognizes to a certain extent that this is impossible, that the old family has been completely severed, that it was to a certain extent rotten, and that she was a manifestation of that rottenness. But now that she understands that she wants this idea of wholeness, this idea of healing, she has taken important steps toward accomplishing that healing, and that matters. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Keep watching Avatar. It is a daring, brilliant show, and I appreciate more and more what they did with Azula in every passing year. The comics are interesting, and I think a lot of them are underrated. They deserve a greater degree of appreciation than they've gotten, this one included. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. That I promise you. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.